I've got 4 different paint rollers in my hand, and each of these has been called the best for painting cabinets and furniture. I'm here to actually test it in a side-by-side comparison to let you know which type of paint roller gives the smoothest finish, as close to a sprayed-on version as you can get. Stick around, I hope it's helpful. We're testing the rollers on these cabinet doors that I got from IKEA in the clearance section for $2. I know I'm wasting 2 doors, but I hope it's helpful to tons of people that it ends up being worth it in the end. I also will spray a section of the doors and brush a section of the doors so we can compare the rollers to each of those methods as well to hopefully figure out which paint roller is the best for your next project. All right, let's go. First, there's a couple things I always do when I'm trying to get a super smooth finish. Number 1, use the right paint. Alkyd enamel paint is great for this. It levels well and has a long open time, which means you don't see brush strokes or roller marks. My favorite brand is Sherwin-Williams Emerald Urethane Trim Enamel. Although I've compared all the Alkyd enamels side by side, I'll link that above. Next, I strain my paint. This was not a new can. I had used it for one other project, and you never know what can be lurking inside. I made sure to prep all my rollers. I'll link a full video up above. There were a couple rollers that definitely needed to be prepped before painting. Otherwise, it would have been a complete disaster. Finally, I used this paint grid to take off all the extra paint before I started painting with any of the rollers. When painting for a smooth finish, less is more. You want your coats to be thin. I have my sprayed on finish that will compare all these two in the end, and I also decided to paint on a section with just a brush so we could compare our rollers to that in the end as well. First up is a high density foam roller. These are the most common rollers you'll find for cabinets and furniture and are available at all home improvement stores. They claim to have a lint-free finish with the smoothest results and no stippling, which are basically like teeny tiny bumps in the paint. You better believe I'll be circling back to all these claims once our final coat dries. Next up is a flocked foam roller. I've only seen these very recently. Maybe they've been around longer, I don't know. Basically, it's a foam roller that feels a little bit hairier or softer. It's much bigger and thicker, and it claims to give an even spray-like finish and to be shed resistant. Next up is a velour roller with a 1/4 inch nap. I've been recommended this type of roller as the best for Alkyd enamel paints by people at the paint store, by readers, and by readers who were told by people at the paint store that it was the best. We're actually going to test it. It claims to be shed resistant, give the smoothest results, and no stippling. Finally, we have a mohair and polyester blend roller in a 1/4 inch nap. I've also been recommended this roller as well for a smooth finish. It works well for top coats, so they say. It's shed resistant and it gives a smooth finish. I always recommend sanding lightly in between coats for the smoothest finish, especially on cabinets. I'm going to link a post up above and in the description that walks through that complete process if you're interested. I sanded with 320 grit sandpaper and wiped everything clean with a tack cloth, and then got onto painting a second and a third coat on these doors. Now, a couple quick notes on the application for each of these types of rollers. First, the high-density foam holds the perfect amount of paint, not too much and not too little, which gives the perfect layer for cabinets and furniture. It glides really nicely across the surface as well. The flocked foam roller is big. In fact, it was so big, it was getting stuck in my paint tray that's made for 4.5-inch rollers every once in a while, so that was a little annoying. Besides that, it holds a lot of paint. Like a lot of paint. No matter how much I rolled over that grid, it was holding a lot of paint, so much that it was almost pooling up. Now, granted, I was painting a smaller surface, so I wasn't able to kind of move the paint around as much as if I was doing a whole door or a dresser. But I personally always recommend lighter coats, and this roller just wasn't allowing me to do so. For the velour roller, it holds a nice amount of paint, probably the least of all the rollers, which after that first coat you can see looks a little weird, but when you apply a second and third, it all ends up working out. It rolls nicely across the surface as well. The mohair roller held a nice amount of paint, similar to the foam roller, but as I painted it on the surface, I almost felt it pulling to one side, kind of like a car does when you have a flat tire. Every once in a while it would do that. I have no better way to explain it. It was pretty odd, and it happened quite a few times when I was using this roller. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Now, this was not a deal breaker for me at all, but just something that I noticed. Now, the moment we've been waiting for, the final results of how each of these rollers performed. All right, we're comparing it to the sprayed on version, which is going to give you the smoothest finish no matter what. The brushed on version is surprisingly smooth. In fact, most alkyd enamel paints do brush on really well, and you only can see very minor brush strokes. You can hardly even feel them at all though. Honestly, you can straight up brush a full piece with alkyd enamel paint and end up with a really nice finish. All right, but we're testing rollers, so let's keep going. Let's take a close look at the foam roller and those claims. As far as the lint-free finish, it is spot on. You will not find a hair, at least from the rollers, in this paint. It gives a smooth finish, and it gives very slight stippling. If you look in the bottom right corner, you can see what I'm talking about, but it is very, very minor. So those claims actually held up pretty well on the high-density roller. For the flocked foam roller, it did give a very smooth finish. I was actually surprised based on how much paint it was holding. However, it also left tons of tiny hairs, like tons of them. No matter how many times I used this roller, which was over 10, the hairs kept appearing. This is a deal breaker for me. I will never use this roller again. For the velour roller, it looks great from far away, but when you get super close and you compare it with some of these other rollers, you can see that it doesn't really give the smoothest finish, and it does have those stippling or those bumps. Now, for the claim of it being shed resistant, I didn't see this right away. Even after conditioning it, and that video is linked in the description, it still was shedding a lot of hairs during the first couple times I used it. Now, once I used it a few times, it was good to go, but that's something to consider if you are planning to get a velour roller. All in all, I actually wasn't super impressed with it. For the mohair roller, it gave a really smooth finish. Actually, the smoothest out of all the rollers. There is really no stippling on this finish at all. For the claim of it being shed resistant, I wish this was more true. It was similar to the velour roller. I had to use it a few times in paint, even after conditioning it, for the hairs not to show up. Now, once I was able to have that happen, it gives a really nice finish, and now I'm not seeing any hairs when I use it, but be aware if you do want to use this roller, you'll want to condition it, link is in the description, as well as use some of your paint and paint it on another surface a few times to make sure any stray hairs are removed before you put this on your cabinets. Just to be sure, I tested out all 4 of these rollers with 2 more brands of paint: General Finishes Milk Paint, which is an acrylic paint, and Benjamin Moore Advanced, which is an alkyd enamel, very similar to the Sherwin-Williams paint that I used in this post. My favorite rollers from this test performed just as well with these other 2 paints, so I can safely tell you the best paint rollers for a smooth finish. So which rollers were the best and the ones that I'll be using on all my future cabinet and furniture painting projects? Definitely my foam roller that I've used for the last 10 years, as well as the mohair blend. I'm going to try out a few more brands of mohair blend rollers to see if there's less shedding, but all in all, these 2 were definitely the best.